Our next speaker, by the way, is kind of a big deal. He came all the way from Silicon Valley. A lot of you know his name. He worked at Atari. He worked with Electronic Arts. He's involved in Holodeck VR, this new startup out of Munich. He's a well-known entrepreneur. He also knows a lot about startups. He helped launch the Startup Accelerator at UC Berkeley, but he is a Stanford man through and through, as you're about to hear. Please give it up for Jeff Burton.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon. Thank you very much to the organizers, to Sasha and to Hannah for making it so easy for me to be here. I also want to give a thank you to Claudia Siblanca, is the director in Munich of the Plug and Play organization there, because I've known him we've been friends for about a decade. He was finishing his PhD at UC Berkeley when we first met, and he's been a great friend for these years, and I really appreciate him too. But I want to talk today about, fairly briefly, about the century of innovation that has transpired in and around the San Francisco Bay Area, a lot of which many of you might not be aware. It's not just since since startups became a big deal in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and since private venture capital started, and basically became a big deal toward the end of the 70s with a tax law change. But starting back in 1887, in San Jose, there was the first mountaintop observatory in the world, and it was in San Jose. By 1906, the first vacuum tube had been invented at Stanford. 1909, the first radio station in the United States was established in San Jose. 1917, the first moving coil loudspeaker. And what's interesting to me today is that today's loudspeakers are still using that technology from 1917 that Magnavox had created. They started in Napa, but they moved right away to San Mateo, which is in the Bay Area. In 1927, the first television broadcast was made in San Francisco. That photo is the Sutro Tower, which used to be super important because it was the television broadcasting tower. Now, of course, everything is basically cable, but it's still used, and it's a sort of an icon around the Bay Area. You can see it from almost anywhere. In 1939, Hewlett-Packard was started, and they created the first consumer-grade audio oscillator. They didn't invent an audio oscillator, but they made this a consumer product, basically because they priced it very, very low. Like, I don't remember, it was like under $100 for this audio oscillator. And what that did, which is a pivotal thing, too, I think, for the Silicon Valley's history, is that it made it possible for a consumer company like Walt Disney to be able to afford to tap into the technology that was going on in Silicon Valley and improve its back then it was Mickey Mouse cartoons, but still that was a combination of high technology and consumer technologies that foreshadowed a lot of stuff. Then we had the atomic bomb, which really was UC Berkeley's fault or credit. It's interesting to think that at the same time we created something that kind of saved the world and foretold its potential disaster future. But anyway, UC Berkeley was really the center for that in the Bay Area. By 1956, the first transistors were being made by William Shockley's company in Mountain View. And behind all of this, the whole time, I have to give credit to Stanford University because it was started in 1891 was when it was organized, but its land grant from the Stanford family was in 1885. And here's what the land grant said, and it's interesting. Well, it says, the object of the university is to qualify its students for personal success and direct usefulness in life. Yeah, that's pretty general. But I tell you what, there's not another university that I've ever seen anywhere in the United States or the world that has that as its objective. You know, they have objectives of educating people, educating students, building great faculties, doing research to, you know, improve the world, but not one of them says its objective is to qualify its students for personal success. Okay, so that has a whole, I think, a whole ripple effect over decades in Silicon Valley as to, you know, how people felt and were treated. One of the results of that was Dean Frederick Terman, who was the engineering dean at Stanford after World War II. Well, he was actually a professor before World War II. After World War II, he became dean. And some of his students were David Packard and Bill Hewlett. But one of the things Frederick Terman did that I think was determinative also in the development of more today's Silicon Valley was that he required his professors of engineering to leave their professorships, take a leave of absence, and start their own company. They could come back after they had gone through that exercise and be a professor, which is probably what most of them wanted to do. Some of them got so rich with their own companies that they didn't come back, but most of them did. And so what that meant was the professors of the engineering students at Stanford had the experience of both being, you know, deep into their subject matter, but also the practical experience of having started a company. And it made them teach their engineering students in a completely different method or manner than was at all common at that time. And I'd say the contribution, or one of the contributions that Hewlett and Packard made, was that at their company, I remember when I was a freshman at Stanford, which was 1968, I had a freshman seminar at the Hewlett-Packard headquarters with their top international vice president. And the policy at the time was that and they had thousands of engineers. Policy of Hewlett-Packard was that if you were an engineer at Hewlett-Packard and you wanted to go start your own company, the corporation wouldn't necessarily, probably wouldn't at all, invest in your company. But here's what they did say, is their policy was, if you leave to start a company and you fail or you succeed, but if you want to come back, if you ever want to join Hewlett-Packard again, we will guarantee you that we'll rehire you. So that really opened the door for their engineers to be able to feel some sort of safety net, so they could go out and start a company. They'd always have a job at Hewlett-Packard. That is not, I don't know of any company that has that as a policy today, but I do know, a few months ago I was talking with the Google executives, and they have trouble finding enough engineers to fill their ranks. And I said to these guys, how do you find them? How do you get engineers to come to Google? And he said, well, you might be surprised. Over half of the people we hire every month are former Google employees. So while it's not their policy to guarantee employment to their employees, if you join Google and leave for a startup or work someplace else, they are more than likely willing and ready to hire you back. So what I think would be a fantastic and interesting development would be if some of the large corporations in Germany that have long histories, if they implemented anything like that policy, and maybe some of them do, I just don't know, to be able to allow their employees to go out and try something new, but be assured that they'd always be rehired by their company. It's a great incentive to help kind of start an attitude and an atmosphere where people can really start to expand their horizons and their possibilities. But that had a huge impact on the way Silicon Valley developed. There's a set of values that I've kind of compiled. It's not exhaustive at all, but I'd say certainly I'll run through them really quickly. Creativity, teamwork, fearlessness, sharing ideas, sharing wealth, owning your own future, owning your future is an important value, and giving back is also an important value. So that, people automatically share both their money, if they earn a lot of money, with startup companies. There's always angel investors around that have done it themselves and are helping other companies. They share the wealth in the Bay Area. There's a cycle of that kind of thing. Also, the whole sharing ideas. I used 10 years ago or longer. I remember being in Europe and talking with companies and having people say, I'm hesitant to tell you what my idea is or to talk about it to anybody because I'm afraid somebody will steal it. And, I say to them, look, if your idea is so facile that somebody can leave talking with you and go implement your idea, it's probably not worth your pursuing. But the fact of the matter is, in Silicon Valley, people enrich their own ideas by talking about it all over the place, to their competitors, every place. It's hard to make anything work. And if you own an idea and believe in it and are passionate about it, you'll be the one to make it work. Nobody else that you talk to will be able to. So that's one of the things that has developed in the Silicon Valley area that I think makes a big difference.
EA Sports 真的 game.
I want to talk a little bit about electronic arts because it did have an impact on the culture of Silicon Valley. And the first thing I want to do a show I'm going to talk about the people that founded the company. Because there were 6 of us, none of us knew how to code any game at all. We were all from Stanford. We had master's degrees from Stanford. Everybody had an MBA except one who had a master's in mechanical engineering. He didn't know how to code games either. We were all marketing people. I was from Atari, but to me, what I think is a list here that's interesting, and it's kind of out of order, but our undergraduate degrees were from Harvard, from Yale, UC Berkeley, and from Stanford. And then we all had master's degrees from Stanford. One of the things I wanted to ask in this room of 1,000 people, how many of you have heard of CDTM? That's what I thought. 1, 2. Okay, so CDTM is a honors master's program in entrepreneurship, acquiring entrepreneurship ideas and mindset in Munich. It's a joint venture between LMU and TUM. I've been following it for the past 6 years. It's been there 20 years. It just last weekend had its 20th anniversary graduation. And it is by far the best academic program for establishing mindset of entrepreneurship in students that I've seen anywhere in the world. And nobody in Germany has heard about it. It's fascinating. They only have 40 students a year. They select 40 from 1,000 applicants. And it's a fantastic program. I don't know if you guys have heard of eGym or Stylite or Outfittery or Unu or Konux. These are all companies that have come out of CDTM students. And they've been very successful. They've raised tens of millions of dollars from Silicon Valley and elsewhere too. But nobody's heard of CDTM. It's fascinating. It's a great place. You should learn about it. At Electronic Arts, we were marketers. So we were caught in the situation where we wanted to establish a relationship of an emotional connection between a computer and a person. So our first print ad, which is about all we could do was print ads at that time. There was no internet or anything else, of course, in 1983. The headline was, "Can a computer make you cry?" And the text is all about how important it is how we thought it was important that there be more than just a piece of hardware and you as a recipient. There needed to be some way to connect you. I want to show a video.
In order for us to do what we are trying to do, we have to be obsessed, and we have to be a little bit arrogant, and we have to be a little bit cocky about having a sense of possibilities that are open to us that aren't open to others because of our convictions. And if we didn't feel that way, if we didn't even have a little bit of a sense of not knowing what we don't know, and if we were too conscious of the pitfalls, if we were too conscious of the obstacles, we might lose our conviction. And we really do have the sense of really being obsessed with it and really believing that we know how to do it better than everybody else. And that may seem arrogant, but if we didn't feel that way, we wouldn't be able to pull it off. And it's because we feel that way that we're going to.
Okay, so that was 1983. Trip Hawkins, our CEO, that reflects every one of our attitudes toward what we were doing. And when I started the accelerator at UC Berkeley in 2012, the CEOs, the founders of companies, had that same attitude, and they still do. It hasn't changed in 40 years. You have to believe in yourself against all odds. It may feel like you're being arrogant, but that's okay. That's what it takes to get through it.
It's possible for a computer to provide a world where the rules are open-ended, where if you're flying around a planet and you decide to take off toward that star, you can. I'd like to write some software that interacts with you in a way that's really close to the way a person would interact with you. That's why I've been mentioning the idea of a software friend. And that sort of should be built into a computer, but it can be built into a program too.
So Bill was one of our first software artists that we contracted with to do, we published his software. It was called Pinball Construction Set. But he was talking about a software friend in 1983. This is before the internet. This is before Siri or anything. And not very many people were thinking that way. So that was the sort of attitude we had. And we were able to really make it, I think, become a reality over the last 30 years. But really, for the first 15 years, we were developing this. The technology caught up with us. We were able to make computers have create a connection with people who use them. Today, we are a $5 billion company. I'm no longer part of it. None of the founders is in the company anymore. But we have a market value of $45 billion last time I looked, which was July 15th. And the number of millionaires we created in this company, well, I don't really know, but it's hundreds. Why? We shared the wealth. Everybody that joined the company had stock options. That's been the policy or the practice in Silicon Valley for the last 4 decades at least. And I think it's just starting to be that way in parts of Europe. It used to be founders would hold onto the stock and not share it with their employees. But I think they've learned that the best way to make a success of a company is to share that wealth. And I've seen, in the past few years since I started working with CDTM in Munich, when those companies there's been a few that have had great exits, and the founders of those companies, guess what they're doing? They're reinvesting. They're putting money, $500,000, into startups coming out of CDTM that are classmates that are just younger than they are. That's a great example of how the whole system self-generates over the years. Of course, the emotional intensity today with XR, with the AR, VR, all the XRs, realities, it's grown a lot. Here's holodeck VR, just a quick intro video to what it involves. The research for it was created at Fraunhofer. You know, Fraunhofer, the large research institute in Germany, and what it does is allow people to enter virtual reality and freely run through it and collaborate with each other on large spaces without being tethered to any kind of headset or anything. These are free-roaming headsets. In 50 meters by 50 meters, we can have up to 100 people being tracked in games. It's really at the bleeding edge, sorry to say it, but it's true, bleeding edge of the technology. Here's an homage to Pong, the original Atari game. But it's such a different experience to put on a headset and feel the presence of another reality. It's, in my opinion, changing the way games are going to be experienced in the future. That's a first-person view in the upper right-hand corner of this guy walking through and opening that door and seeing a bunch of planks he has to walk across. It's if you haven't experienced it, and I suspect most of you have, still I think it's a huge technological revolution that's going to hit. A problem is that our eyes and brains can be fooled. Have all of you heard of deep fakes? No? You can create now videos that you have, unless you're really careful. This was a Saturday Night Live skit, but the original guy was in Saturday Night Live. This deep fake is made with a guy that looks a lot like him. They've been able to, and this is Saturday Night Live too, not really. This is the real thing and a deep fake. But, you know, if you don't pay attention, and a lot of voters don't, they might see this guy who's doing the deep fake and think it's actually Trump. This is not video, it's just Photoshop, but it's so good I had to include it because you can't tell that's not Queen Trump. I mean, it's fascinating. And here I am. I did a standing scan, and the company rigged me to dance. And here I am again in volumetric video that was made just last week in Lithuania. In 30 seconds, we did this video. I was standing between two cameras. They put me in. They set my image in the room, and then you could walk around. Not a walk. You could walk around. But look at the image. That is my face, unfortunately, in great detail. I was able to walk up to that image of me and stand this close to it with a VR headset on and see every detail of my face. Okay, so what is that? How are we going to cope with these fake videos or images that we don't know? How do we distinguish if they're real? And that brings to another kind of development, I think, in the industry these days, which I think is inevitable and important. And that is, personal verification of ID on blockchain. I think that's going to be one of the things that is going to make the blockchain absolutely invaluable, is that we will have a way of knowing for sure that what we're seeing, either by I don't know how yet, but we'll have the way of identifying what's real and what's not real, because right now it's very hard to distinguish the two. And that can lead to, as we saw in the 2016 election in the United States, that can lead to a lot of mischief and cause lots of problems. So this brings me to sort of an ending thing, which is my list of the 5 advice items to entrepreneurs. The first one is, when you start a company, only select the people that you believe are the smartest and most talented you know. They should be smarter than you are, more talented than you are, but bring those people together. The second one is that you might as well try to make the biggest impact that you possibly can imagine. Change the world. It's just as hard to make an ordinary, regional company as it is to make a worldwide, world-changing company. Number 3, always be honest and true to yourself. It's very hard to do. It's very easy to not do that. But even if it doesn't give you an advantage, you want to be honest in your life. And number 4, not many people say this, loads of money doesn't always deliver happiness. I can guarantee you, I can stand up here and find lots of people that I know that can show it doesn't solve problems in their lives. The 5th piece of advice is to always give back. You are so lucky to have the opportunity to be an entrepreneur, of those of you that are. You need to share it. It's really important. So where does that lead us? Okay, with Brexit and Trump, there's a void in world leadership. And the EU seems to me, from my perspective of the last 10 years of being involved, the EU is absolutely ready to take their position in the world. And Germany is the leading entity in the EU to fill this void. The rest of the world is depending on you, on your young people, on your startups, on your ideas, on your intelligence, on your ability to execute. And that's something that I can't get across enough to Europe. The US is going to be mired in a mess for probably the next decade politically, and it's going to fall behind. Europe needs to step forward and play its role in the West. And people ask me often, isn't it kind of too late to start a company? Aren't there too many startups? And hadn't everything been done? And my response is, when we started Electronic Arts, there were maybe 5 million home computers in the market. That was our market size. Now there's 5 billion people with smartphones and communication around the world. That this is the best time in the world to start a company.
So bright, I've gotta wear shades.
That's my ending slide. Future's so bright, we've got to wear shades. Thanks.